He has been certified for the first level supervisor, technical accident investigator, and child victim interviewer. He later worked as a child abuse detective for Children's Advocacy Center until he was hired for his current position as a fraud investigator for the state of Washington. Please help me welcome Mr. James Clarkson.
Also honoring a person who can't be here physically, but I believe is here in spirit. And that's my friend June Crain. And so when I'm telling you this history, I'm going to be talking about her both from the point of view of being an investigator and trying to look at exactly what she reported, what I could verify, what I could not verify, and also what I learned from her as one human being to another, as one friend to another. And it's a great privilege for me to follow Richard Dolan, and I was trying to think when I looked at the schedule how I was going to do this, because he truly is our historian, and I mean that with the greatest respect. He's given legitimacy to this entire field of endeavor, given us perspective, a way of analyzing our past and trying to figure out what we need to take with us into the future. But every one of those stories, every single incident that's reported, this is what truly fascinates me. I have not had an experience yet. But ever since I was a young man, I've been fascinated by the people who are the witnesses. Sincere, professional people, everyday people. The reason that I love June as a friend, and I love her story, and I hope you will by the time I'm done, is that she was one of us. She was a working woman. In today's world, we would call her an office manager. But at the time that she worked at Wright Patterson Air Force Base between 1942 and 1952, a woman could not have a title like that. So instead, what happened is that she was a clerk stenographer, only she had a Q-level security clearance. And she was promoted, as you will see. And later on, I'm going to let June tell you herself. I have some clips right out of the main interview that I had with her in 1997. And she will tell you how secrecy works and what it's like to work in that environment. Now, the title is The June Crain Story, Wright Patterson Air Force Base, UFOs Crashed and Recovered. I actually had another title in mind, and that was Finding June Crain. But I thought that no one would understand that except me, and so I wanted to have a title that would relate directly to the Crash Retrieval Conference. The reason I would have chose Finding June Crain is something that I learned a long time ago as a military police investigator, as a detective sergeant, as a patrol sergeant doing my job. No matter how it's portrayed in the movies, they always want you to think that policemen are cold and different. Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am. The truth is, and I think if there are any ex-law enforcement officers in the room, they will probably agree with me. Everything that you go through has an effect on you. When you investigate something, when you get really involved in a case, it has an effect on you. You don't walk away unchanged. So although I'm going to be telling you a story about June Crain, I'm also going to be telling you a story about how I got here today. Personal transformation. How I went from being a teenager who collected UFO books and was always interested in the field to actually stepping out professionally and saying, yes, call me what you will, a believer, a buff, whatever title you want to lay on me. This is the most important mystery that I will ever try to solve in my life, is the reason that we're all here. And June knew it too. So I want to set a little bit of background. I like words. The English language is extremely important, and it's good to know exactly how you're using a certain word. I'm going to submit to you that my friend June Crain was one of the strongest corroborating witnesses around for this entire UFOs and what does the government know about it question. Corroborate essentially means to make robust or make strong. Anytime that you're investigating something, you have direct witnesses, someone who actually was there, someone who actually can tell you what they saw, what they did, etc. But equally important are the corroborating witnesses, and sometimes they're even more important. I've investigated numerous cases that have successfully gone to trial that involved corroborating witnesses, what you call circumstantial evidence. In other words, someone who didn't see it happen, but they are qualified as experts based upon where they were and what they knew about the background. We're going to put everything into a context. We've been doing that for the last 2 days. And many of my main points for this presentation, my thunder has already been stolen to some degree. However, I think I can raise a little of my own before we're done. We're going to be creating a texture, a weaving together of facts, circumstances, ideas to form this tapestry of UFO knowledge. I'm going to focus on 3 levels. First off, June Crain is a key corroborating witness to the UFO crash retrieval events based upon her work at Wright Patterson Air Force Base between 1942 through 1952, and the fact that she was in the right place and had the right access. Hopefully along the way, I'm going to convey to you that although I did become friends with her, I was also going through an investigative process, meaning that I was trying to figure out what can I prove and what can't I prove, and what stands the test of time. And finally, I'm going to give you a little bit different view of history. This is history where it involves you. Because as I said, this is a transformative process. So my question was, how is this going to change me and what am I going to do about it? June Crain would have been a great presentation even without UFOs. The reason is she lived through a remarkable period of time in a very important place. Ever since the beginnings of aviation in the United States, Wright Field was a center for research and development. The first wind tunnels were there. It's not surprising that the Army Air Corps had a major facility there. It's not surprising that eventually when the Army Air Corps in 1947 became the United States Air Force, that one of the major bases was there, or that the Foreign Technology Division was located there, or that the bodies and the wreckage went there. But June would have been worth knowing anyway, just because she could tell you history. For instance, December 7th, 1941, June was able to tell me she lived in Dayton, Ohio. That's where she grew up. She said if you wanted a good job in Dayton, Ohio, you went to work for the government. The night that Pearl Harbor was announced, Wright Field went from being an unsecured facility to having 2.5-ton trucks pull up with jeeps and soldiers, and they posted sentries where each sentry could see the next one to surround the entire facility. And of course, after that, they built fences, guard posts, etc. And I would add that June worked in a secure facility inside of a secure facility. In other words, you had to have a pass to get in the gate, and you further had to have the clearance to get where she worked. How do we assess witness credibility? This is exactly what I use as a policeman. This is exactly what I use as an investigator now. It always comes down to the same things. Was the witness able to have made the observations and obtained the information that is reported? In other words, if somebody tells me something, could they have been there? Could they have seen that? What was their perspective? were they in the right place with the right time, and did they have the right access? Before I'm done, I think you'll agree that June Crain had all of that. Is the witness credible and consistent? Does the story change over time? And by that I mean when the witness interacts with me as an investigator. You speak to them the first time and they report a mysterious light in the sky, and they realize that there isn't too much you can do about it. And then they call you up the next day and say, oh, by the way, I talked to the commander of the alien armada. Okay, we have a credibility problem now. Not going to say it's impossible, I'm just going to say that we've got a problem. That is not the same thing as getting more and more information out of a person because they've become comfortable with you, you've become comfortable with them, trust is developed. As the person starts to recall what happened, they get more and more details coming back. I think that during this conference we've had the privilege of actually seeing a very important witness, Mr. Burroughs, go through the beginnings of a process like that. So I sincerely believe that he will become more and more credible and more knowledgeable as time goes on, as June did. Is the witness account internally consistent? This is a little bit more subtle. You've just got to analyze all the circumstances and make sure that this flows in a sensible, logical way. It's what I call ringing right. When someone tells you something, you kind of have an aha moment. It's like when you're trying to solve a case and suddenly you know who did it. It's that kind of a feeling. Does the witness admit limitations on their own knowledge? June did. One of the things that fascinated me about her is she was in her early 70s when I met her. And she knew what she knew, and she knew what she didn't know. And that impressed me a great deal. She didn't guess. If she wasn't sure, she told me she wasn't sure. This impressed me no end. And the basic things that she told me were consistent. They were actually consistent over a period of years. What motive does the person have for making a statement? The classic phrase is qui bono. This is the one phrase that you ought to have in the back of your mind. Take it with you when you leave here, and every time you turn on the news and you listen to a story, you want to start asking, who benefits by this? What's the motivation? Be suspicious. It's really good investigative procedure, especially in our field. Is the testimony corroborated by other statements and evidence? In other words, how does it fit into the big picture? Now, here's my definition of history. Not perhaps academically rigorous, but I would submit more emotionally appealing in some ways. What makes history real? A heritage, something that you hold in your heart that moves you to commitment and action. It's not enough to know about all of these UFO sightings. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do as individuals, as researchers, to move forward? And maybe it won't be a lot. Maybe it'll be just some little thing that you can do. Maybe it'll be a conversation where you defend this field instead of backing away. I caught myself a couple of times when I got here to Vegas and people said, well, what convention are you going to? And there's that moment where you go, should I tell them or shouldn't I tell them? And I realized that's wrong. I was cheating myself. I was cheating a whole lot of other good people that I believe in, and I was cheating my friend June. I'm proud of what I do. I'm proud to be here. I think you all should be proud to be here too. We're going to focus on June's work at Wright Patterson Air Force Base. The documentation I have for that came from two sources. One of them is that June gave me a pile of personal papers that she had from years ago. Her first appointment ever, all of her promotions, when she got a commendation for coming up with a good suggestion on how to better secure safes. I also got confirmation by going through that wonderful process of applying for someone's record from the Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. And I sent in my 3 or 4 letters, and they told me that they didn't have any such record, and I would keep sending a request letter back at them. And then finally, out of the blue one day, I got this huge manila envelope, and inside was her entire history, the same history that they said they didn't have. In order to put June in context, and I think that this may answer some other questions, there is no doubt secrecy in the UFO field. I mean, that's not even up for debate. But I will submit to you that the Air Force has actually been pretty honest about what they were going to do all the way along the line. They have not really kept that a secret. And I believe that they've put this policy in place a long time ago. It was formed out of the era where June was employed at Wright Patterson Air Force Base, and fundamentally, I don't think it's changed. Now, they've talked about the definitions. This is Air Force Regulation 200-2. They talk about the definition of UFOs, and they also talk about what they're going to do about it and why they're interested. And these are the 4 phases of air defense as defined by the Air Force. And bear in mind, no value judgment implied, they're there to protect us. They are interested in detection, identification, interception, and unfortunately, destruction. Because we all know that that may not necessarily be a good idea. As the pilots found out, the Iranian pilots and numerous other instances, and actually there's an excellent book out right now called Shoot Them Down that also goes into that entire Flatwoods monster case and basically puts a whole other spin on it and puts it into a context of a downed alien craft and possibly a rescue mission to recover their buddy and air battles and all of that along the way. This same regulation talks about how the great majority of flying objects have been conventional, familiar things. However, the possibility exists that UFOs that are reported may be hostile or new foreign vehicles of unconventional design. So therefore, all sightings must be reported rapidly. Now, geography is going to play an important part in this story. And what I'm going to show you is that these links between New Mexico, Wright Patterson Air Force Base, it's back and forth, it always goes the same way. What is their goal? They want UFOs to be, until all are scientifically or technically explained, or until the full potential of the sightings has been exploited. And I would submit to you that that's exactly what Richard Dolan is talking about when he says that this evolved, this policy right here, its current form is the special access projects, the corporations that have taken over the technology and that are going to do everything possible to keep it secret. And yes, I will get to June. I'm just painting the background of my portrait. The investigation of reported UFOs is to be done to the Foreign Technology Division, Air Force Systems Command, Wright Patterson Air Force Base. That's where all the information is supposed to go. Interestingly enough, that's the location where foreign technology is going to be taken apart, researched, and hopefully exploited. So here's the little quick geography lesson. Wright Patterson Air Force Base, located in Dayton, Ohio. Ocean Shores, Washington is where I met June Crain. And then some of the key sites. June told me along the way that she knew of, by 1952, she had heard about at least 3 crash recoveries that the Air Force was aware of and working on, and possibly a 4th. Cape Girardeau, Missouri, Roswell, New Mexico, Kingman, Arizona, and Aztec are just possible examples. There could obviously be others. Just to give you some idea of where the beginning part of this story takes place, that's the Washington coast. That's a close-up of Grays Harbor. Aberdeen, which is at the mouth of the Chehalis River, is where I used to live and where I was a police officer for 20 years. It was a logging town, and we kept kind of busy as policemen. Ocean Shores is a resort community that was originally founded by, among other people, Pat Boone. And they were hoping for this huge real estate success that never quite materialized. This is a picture of June Crain that you all may have seen, and I believe that this is, of course, her favorite picture and how she would like to be remembered. She was born June 19th of 1925, and she passed on August 23rd of 1998. And I really wish that I had more opportunities to interview her. You never know when you're dealing with a witness, obviously a more mature witness, how much time you may or may not have. I love this quote. This is how June and I became friends. And this is when I knew something really extraordinary was going to happen. I'm 72 years old. I've outlived 2 husbands and survived cancer twice. What are they going to do? Shoot me or put me in prison? I can do either one. I love you, June. This is an aerial view of Ocean Shores. It's really an interesting place, great place to go and see the beach. And she lived in a home down towards the southern end and near one of the canals. I met her at the Ocean Shores Library, and that was in 1993. And it wasn't until 1997 that I actually got to talk to her at length. My own commitment to being involved in UFOs has been to go out and give lectures to the public. So in the southwest region of Washington State, there are about 24 Timberland Library branches, and I think I've given presentations at every one of them at least once, if not repeatedly. And I've had the experience of having as few as nobody, all the way up to, I stopped counting at over 100. So it's been that they can go either way, and actually that can be quite exciting. The one where we had over 100 people, it took me an hour and a half to get out of the parking lot. In 1993, I was just finishing up, and this very determined elderly woman walked up to me and said, "You're right, the government knows all about UFOs and they're keeping it secret." And I said, "Well, how do you know that?" She said, "I can't tell you." And I said, "Well, how do you know?" She said, "Because I worked there." And so I prodded her a little more, and I said, "Why can't you tell me?" And she said, "Because they'll come and arrest me." And she kind of looked very warily at me. The reason is that I had made no secret of it. I was doing this when I was off duty, and I was a detective sergeant for the police department at the time, and I think she was about half afraid that I was going to be the one to arrest her. Not likely. I was also a state section director for the Mutual UFO Network. And I've been in MUFON for many years, and I guess I should just say, so that I don't cross any policy lines, the opinions expressed herein are solely those of this particular investigator. There, I did it. I just don't, we all have our own beliefs, and I understand the needs of an organization. You got to be really careful what you commit to as an organization, because it's really hard to put it in reverse and back away and then say that wasn't really a good idea and we made a mistake. Although I would like to hear some of our governmental agencies do that. But anyway, on with our history. Here is the reason why I believe that disclosure will happen. The secrecy will come to an end, because it will destroy itself. Every plan to keep something secret or to lie or to hide something creates the seeds of its own destruction. And I had this proven to me because of my meeting with June Crain. I gave her my business card and I said, June, if you ever change your mind, please call me. I started talking to people and I found out that June Crain was a well-known philanthropist in the community. And in fact, if you go to the Ocean Shores Library and you look at the bench out front, you'll see a little plaque that says dedicated to June Caba. Now, June was married twice. She was born June Crain. She married one of the security policemen at Wright Field named Clarence, and I'll explain what happened to him. And then eventually she married Mr. Caba, who had already passed away by the time that I met June. So she was known in Ocean Shores as June Caba. Let's go back to 1997. That was the year of the 50th anniversary of Roswell. I didn't get to go, but I did find out that they hired off-duty police officers from all over the state of New Mexico to come to Roswell just for traffic control. So it must have been a good time. So I don't know if any of you were there, but if you were, I'd love to hear the story. All at once, the American public was fired up about Roswell. It was everywhere. Unfortunately, so was the disinformation. And of course, this was one of their key responses. And I can't do any better than the way it was described last night, and I won't. I won't even attempt it other than I have a title for it. I call it official disinformation. And I will explain why I absolutely know that this is something that comes out of the rear end of the south end of a north-facing bull. Okay? I know this for a fact. And the public media followed right along. Anybody remember this magazine? This is just one of many from the 50th anniversary time. Now notice when you look at the cover that there are all these cutesy references to X-Files, etc. And God knows, I am a die-hard X-Files fanatic. But why do they want to link the Roswell event to the X-Files? Because the X-Files is a fictional television show, and they always want to marginalize the entire UFO phenomena. This is why people who see UFOs are the tinfoil hat brigade. They're kooks, they're nuts, they're weirdos, and people who are interested in it are buffs, hobbyists, or the dreaded believer. Because they don't want to admit that it could happen to anybody. All of these UFO witnesses were leading ordinary lives. They walked around the corner and suddenly they were confronted with something for which there was no conventional explanation, something that does not fit into their frame of reference. So I call this media disinformation. This is just one example of many. Now, throughout all of this, and this is another perspective that I like to keep in mind, I don't know how many of you have read it, the science fiction novel Dune by Frank Herbert. There's a phrase in there that I love. It talks about a feint within a feint. Why are we walking into this, Paul? The Duke frowned at his son. Knowing where the trap is, that is the first step in evading it. This is like single combat, only on a larger scale. A feint within a feint within a feint, seemingly without end. We may very well be part of somebody's plot right now. By meeting here, by sharing our ideas, we may be being played some way. You always got to keep that in the back of your mind. Who benefits? That doesn't mean that we're not going to keep right on doing what we're doing. No, no way. But we may be being played. So I'm always looking as an investigator. When I insert myself into an investigation, I become part of the equation. And that means that I'm playable on the card table. And so you always want to keep that in mind. How might you be being used? Now this part I love. June told me one of the first things was that the balloon lie had been used before. And I should explain how the balloon subject came up and how I talked to June again. Because remember, I met her in 1993, but it wasn't until 1997, the 50th anniversary, I had seen the coverage on CNN, and all at once my phone rang. I picked it up, and there was June's voice. And the first words out of her mouth were, quote, "It's a damn lie," unquote. And I said, "Well, good to hear from you, June." And she said, "Have you seen it?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "Have you been looking at CNN?" She said, "They're talking about dummies and they're talking about balloons." And she said, "They've used the balloon lie before. These people don't even come up with really terribly original explanations." And so I did a little prowling around and I found this on the internet, and this just about blew me away. This is really interesting. Here's the balloon lie. Now, if Project Mogul really is the explanation for Roswell, aren't those classified components of a top secret project that are in the newspaper there in January of 1948? Shouldn't that all be classified? Somebody breaking security there, putting that in the newspaper? And here's the lovely little explanation, and this is even more interesting because it talks about the Watson Laboratories, Alamogordo, New Mexico, and the Air Materiel Command, which is located at Wright Patterson Air Force Base, and as I will show you, was one of June's original employers. I mean, her paycheck comes from originally the War Department, then the United States Air Force, and then it breaks down to the Air Materiel Command, and then various laboratories, etc., underneath that. This is a now famous photograph. Interestingly enough, I got a copy of this photograph from one of the people who was originally involved in this research. So this is where we're going to talk about briefly about the Roswell report, case closed. I also got that photograph from the gentleman on the right, who is Raymond Madsen. He was a young lieutenant then. The question is, of course, is the dummy in the middle the real ET? Not according to Raymond Madsen. Now, he was a complete stranger to me. I called him on the phone, I introduced myself, I explained my historical interest in the field. We got to talking, and I sent him the June transcript and some background material, and he was kind enough to send me a whole packet of reports and photographs about his research. To make a long story short, he's very upset. He is now retired. He retired as a lieutenant colonel, I believe. And he didn't like the way they finished the dummy drop research to begin with, and he pointed out to me that he didn't even start doing the dummy drop research until about 1955. So it couldn't possibly have been Roswell. But even aside from that, he has read the case closed report, and he's angry because he feels that he was misquoted, that he was used, that they just consulted him because he had been involved in this research, and he never intended for any of this to be used in that case closed report. So if you are identifying the bad guys behind the case closed, please do not include Mr. Raymond Madsen. He's a delightful gentleman. There are two major commands at Wright Patterson Air Force Base: the Air Force Materiel Command and the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, which now incorporates what used to be known as the Foreign Technology Division. I love this. Look at the symbols for the Air and Space Intelligence Center. That just fascinates me. We've got a sphinx, we've got a triangle, and we've got some sort of odd star-shaped craft. Now, the Air Force Materiel Command, that one is pretty obvious because what we've got there is, in the middle is the symbol for the original Army Air Corps, I believe. And of course, we know that some fantastic technology has gone through there. Interestingly enough, if you Google I'm going to move through some of these. If you Google the Air Materiel Command, you get something like that, and basically what it does, it traces out the history about the Air Force wrestling with, do we put research and development in with our logistics command, or do we separate them out? So they've been apart, they've been merged together, they've been put, taken apart again. This is the part that fascinates me. If you Google Foreign Technology Division and you look down several, you'll eventually get some history like that. And they will talk about that it's home to the Air Force Institute of Technology, an educational institution that supports Air Force and Department of Defense. This is where, in the Cold War era, any MiGs that were recovered, the technology was exploited. In other words, you bring it in, you take it apart, you try to figure out what its weaknesses are, what its strengths are, and what you might be able to do with it. But we're going to go back in time. June talked about the fact that if you wanted a good job in Dayton, Ohio, you went to work for the government. Well, the actual statistics bear that out, because in 1942, they had 36,908 civilian employees on one base. It shrank slightly by 1953 to 27,283. Originally, there were 40 buildings. By the spring of 1944, there were over 300 structures. And see, June was there when all of this was going on. It's a different world than what we see today. This is a photo that she gave to me. These were some of her friends, the test pilots. And I also, in the background there, you'll notice I used some of her documents. So you see Engineering Division, Equipment Laboratory, Wright Patterson, etc. All of those little things like that, I just pulled off of documents that she gave me. This, for example, is the first document in her file. This is her original appointment, and this is kind of interesting because of what it shows in history. First off, this is a substandard size of paper. It is not 8.5 by 11. It was a reduced size because during the war, everything had to be conserved, including paper. So if they could get by with a smaller form, they did. Notice that it's the War Department, the United States of America War Office. Somehow that's more honest. I don't know. Maybe we should have truth in advertising. Wright Field, Ohio, July 3rd, 1942. I mean, this is the real thing. This is actually, for those who don't remember that era, this is actual typewriter onto paper. And that also came up in June's work. June worked in an office where all of the information in the office was so sensitive that one of the requirements was that at the end of the day, you took the typewriter ribbon out of your typewriter and it got locked in a safe too, along with every single piece of paper that you worked on. Also notice her original position, she made $1,260 per year. We've had a little bit of inflation since then. Think about working in an office before computers, and you're dealing with top secret information. Her job, she's a civilian employee, she's actually the office manager, is to log in and log out high security information. And remember, there are two parameters. You have to have the right security clearance and you have to have the need to know. So June told me what great fun she had telling high-ranking officers where they could go when they wanted access to a document that they were not authorized to see, because she had a full-bird colonel behind her who told her, you enforce security regulations or else. And you'll hear it in her voice in a little bit. how seriously security is in a facility like that. It's a different world. This is where she got an award for coming up with a little metal plate to go over the combination dial of a safe so that it would be harder for someone standing over your shoulder to see the combination you were dialing. And through the years, June got promoted. We have all the documents that show the details of every position that she held. So the important part of this is there is absolutely no doubt that June Crain worked at Wright Patterson Air Force Base from 1942 to 1952. Not even an issue. This is interesting. This is a notification of personnel action form, but look what happened. They didn't even have the new stationery yet. So they X'd out War Department and typed in the Department of the Air Force. So, May 13th, 1948. This is June's secret clearance. Now, she told me that she had a Q-level security clearance. I don't have a document that verifies that. However, I'm not so sure that they would have given it to me. I had someone tell me once, they said, well, it's not possible. She couldn't have had a Q-level security clearance. And I ran that by my father when he was still alive, and my father was a control room operator at a radioactive fuel plant in Paducah, Kentucky, which was the second uranium processing plant in the United States. And he had a Q-level security clearance, and the original ones were actually a letter Q that you had to pin to your clothing that would identify you as being cleared for a particular access to a particular area. Now, this is where we get into the parts of June Crain telling me all about her time at Wright Patterson that were most fascinating. And one of the reasons is that she told me about things that at the time I couldn't verify them anywhere. The information was just not available. And through an extraordinary set of circumstances, I got information on several of these points. June kept telling me Kanaki wrote the Bible on parachutes. And it took me quite a while to figure out what she was talking about. But she told me that in the laboratory where she worked, they were working on projects that at the time were highly classified and extremely important, like the gun sight aperture camera, ejection seats, and also how to drop a heavy payload by parachute onto a battlefield. There's a lot of research that goes into this. It's way more technical than you might think. For instance, you want to know about air friction on the rigging lines underneath that chute when you drop a heavy payload. All of these things become important. This led me to study Project Paperclip and the German scientists that were brought over to the US at the end of World War II, because it turned out that there really was a Mr. Kanaki, and for want of a better description, he really did write the Bible on parachutes. Now, at the time, this was just one of those odd things that she said during our interview that I could not verify. And I guess this is as good a place as any to explain how I got here. June passed away in 1998, and I was faced with a problem. I had these transcribed interviews. I had all of these papers. I knew that I had this absolutely fabulous witness and a friend. And I also knew that I made her a promise that I would tell her story. I didn't know what to do with it. That problem was solved for me one night when I was sitting in a patrol car. There was nothing going on, and because they had AM radios in the patrol car, I was listening to Art Bell. And there was a radio program on, and it was Ryan Wood and Bob Wood. And they were talking about the Majestic documents. Well, I was all ears then. I was really excited. And this is before you could get the Majestic documents online, and they gave out a phone number. And I called that phone number the next day, and I said, I really want to get copies of these documents. What do I got to do? And I said, by the way, I'm a police sergeant in Aberdeen, Washington, and I have tape recordings, transcripts, papers, original documents, all about this lady who worked at Wright Patterson Air Force Base. And they said, we'll get back to you. Well, the way they got back to me was I got called by a travel agent. And I thought, well, that's exciting. I mean, nothing like that has ever happened to me before. And they said, well, we want to fly you to Newport, California. And I said, well, I don't have the time and I'm not sure I have the money. And they said, we're paying. And I said, I'll make the time. And then I thought real quick and I said, you know, I usually don't go anywhere without my wife. And she is a librarian. And they really amazed me and they said, we'll bring her too. And I went, oh, this is getting better by the minute. Well, then I ended up in a room with people whose books had sat on my shelf for years. I got to meet Linda Howe. I got to meet Jim Mars. I was completely, and Paul Davids. And I was just like absolutely stunned. And I even remember spending a sleepless night after Linda passed around some of the metal that probably came off of one part of the Roswell spacecraft. Well, it turned out that everybody there was really interested in that story because, as I'm going to tell you in a little while, June probably got to handle some of the other metal that was on the Roswell spacecraft. So that, of course, led me to being here. There was a gentleman at that original gathering who said, you cannot ever mention my name, but I'll help you. Now, he was alluding to the fact that he was in the intelligence community. And after I left that meeting and came back up to Aberdeen, I got a mysterious package in the mail. And I'll show you part of that in a moment. But it does turn out that Theodore Konaki is the parachute engineer's engineer. I mean, this man wrote the book on everything. Much of his research has been used for the recovery of space capsules, etc. This man, forgot more about parachutes than most people will ever learn. This is what I got in the mail. Physics and Medicine of the Upper Atmosphere, a study of the aeropause. I mean, this is a highly technical publication. Notice the University of New Mexico Press. Now, this is what's interesting. We've got 2 articles in there. One of them was the reason that he sent me the extract, because he highlighted it, and obviously it's T.W. Konaki. It's a highly technical article on calculating air friction on rigging lines for high payload parachutes. And look who else is on there. Lincoln La Paz. Now there is an interesting name, because there's a high probability that, among other things, aside from being called in to consult on the green fireballs, he may have done some crash analysis in New Mexico for the military after Roswell. So he and I might have something in common. He, of course, being a scientist, and I being a policeman with some experience as an accident reconstruction specialist. Only this would be, of course, an accident of a whole other type. This is one of the big mysteries of the June story. And the first person who pointed out the problem with this part of her story was June. One of the first things that we talked about was that she told me that she took dictation from Dr. Werner von Braun. She described this entire scene about how she was told by an officer, a major, that she was going to have to stay late, that she could not go home, that he had a special assignment for her. She recalled that he wore a sidearm. He escorted her to a still more secure area of Wright Patterson. Wright Patterson was home to some of the Project Paperclip scientists, so presumably that was the destination. She had to take dictation from this man. June told me that they picked her because she was best at transcription, at dictation. And that this man had very broken English, very strong German accent, highly technical words. That was the way how June described it. And she was told that she could not go home until that report was 100% perfect. So she stayed until 3 o'clock in the morning. And this major told her, and this was, I went through this at least twice with June, and both times that she told me, she started crying. She said that the major told her, if we get this $600,000, you will have had your moment in history, because this will be the beginning of the U.S. space program. Now, I'm still trying to track all of that down, and the problem is, she insisted that it was Dr. Werner von Braun. I have gone through 6 different reference books on Project Paperclip, and I still have not resolved that mystery. June mentioned Project Caucasian. She went through a long description of how her boss flinched every time it was mentioned. At the time that I got the interview from her, there was no mention of Project Caucasian anywhere on the internet or in any reference book. It just was not around. Since then, the files have been declassified. I am moving this along a little bit because I got to make sure that you hear the June audio, and my time runs away with you up here. It turns out that there really was a Project Caucasian, and it's perfectly in line with June's history. Project Caucasian was the code name for the rigging project for a hydrogen bomb that was going to be dropped by the B-36 bomber. Because obviously, if you're dropping a hydrogen bomb, you really want to get out of the area before that thing goes off. Interestingly enough, while I was studying this, I learned another example of how things are kept from the public. I didn't know this. Did you know that a live hydrogen bomb was dropped just outside of Albuquerque in 1957? It was not publicized until 1986. Now, fortunately, only the conventional explosives went off, and it created a 25-foot crater, and it made a cow into a flat mac. But does this sound familiar? June made the comment to me originally. She said, they'll come and arrest me. That was when we originally met. It turns out that one of the last documents that she signed was a non-disclosure agreement. This is one of the key parts of the whole June story. This is a wedding that June attended, and she could not remember the man's name, his last name. She said his first name was Clarence, and she told me a story, and I'm going to let her relate it to you.
And now, the sergeant, his first name's Clarence, Master Sergeant. His first name's Clarence. I went to their wedding. I sent the picture of the wedding to Randall. I still can't remember that man's last name.
Okay.
But he was in charge of that airplane. And when he came to
what kind of an airplane?
Well, it was a regular transporter.
A transport, a military transport.
Yeah.
And what was it that he said?
It came in from New Mexico. He said, "What I brought in this morning, it's in here.
Okay.
I want you to read this."
I will.
And he said that he brought the little men in.
Gave him 2 little men.
He called them little green men. Then he described them as a greenish blue. And they were 4 foot tall, and they were dead.
So the color could have been because they were dead. Not.
Yeah. But see, it could have been anything.
And we're talking about non-humans.
The non-humans, right.
Did he say anything else about them?
No, not really. Because it was only a matter of 15 minutes. We were having our coffee that morning. And so when Clarence hit the deck, he told us about this. That was his news for the day.
Is this one of those things where he's kind of like, maybe, I'm trying to guess here, but were there like maybe other ladies there and he's sort of like showing off or telling? No, he wasn't showing off.
No. These guys don't show off. I mean,
this is a serious man telling a story.
When I'm saying engineers are sort of wacky, there's one thing they're not. It's not a wackiness like you'd think just acting like a fool. It's just, it's hard to explain. But they're very serious. They don't tell lies, they don't have jokes, they don't do anything like that. And so when they say something, they know they better be the truth. You just don't lie. You get your head knocked off.
Was this master?
I want to make sure we get through all of these, so I'm going to move it along. This is a close-up of the individual that June, I would love to identify the man in that picture if there was a way to do it. Now, that same morning after that incident happened where the master sergeant revealed that he had brought in bodies, a courier came around to every single person and made them sign what was called a too hot memo. This meant you had to drop what you're doing, you had to sign the memo, and it basically said that some irresponsible person has been conveying rumors about little green men and a saucer. You will cease immediately under penalty of law, etc. The question is, why would anybody even care about what essentially should be office gossip? Why even pay any attention to it if it wasn't important? And how did they know so quickly? This is a copy of a letter in the background that she actually sent to another UFO researcher several years earlier, and she told me she didn't mind being taped, but then she kept on wanting me to read the letter, and I kept wanting her, come on, June, talk about it, because I want to get this on the recording. I'll skip through this. She was involved with the engineers who went down to New Mexico, who worked on the original rocket that we developed from V2 technology, which was the Aero-B rocket. This is her talking about
Probably one
secrecy.
thing, and they would
Never
do
fly.
something else.
Right. And this was a cover-up. When this report in newspapers said how could such a conspiracy exist, that's how it existed. Because it was right at the very start of it. Project Blue Book was not formed to investigate those things. It was formed to stop the people from thinking that's what it was. That's my opinion, and I'll stick with it.
And somebody else was actually investigating.
Right. They were being investigated by the Project Blue Book officers, yes. But the basic thing and the reason why they was told people were investigating it and everything, they were investigating it all right, very, very religiously. But at the same time, they were telling people they were nuts or drunk or dreaming or under drugs or something. And that's what Project Blue Book was all about. It was to try to squelch all talk of UFOs.
If I remember right, too, in the letter you mentioned that people in this group went to White Sands to do testing and then came back.
Yes.
And did they say that anything unusual had happened to them?
Well, they said they were just as thick as fleas up there. They'd sit at night, they'd sit on the outside of their motels where they would stand or the buildings, and they would just watch them go over all types and shapes. There'd be motherships, big ones with little ones coming out of it, and then they'd see them return, and they had different colored lights. Some had orange, sometimes red, yellow, different lights they would see. And then what they would do, if the people, the engineers and scientists would report it that they saw them, they locked them up in a motel for 24 hours with no access to no radios, no people, no nothing, and they'd bring the meals into them, but have no contact with anybody, and they had them to write up what they saw, and then when they come out the following day, 24 hours later, they'd have them write it up again. And like the engineer said, the hell with it, I'm not going to report it anymore. I'm not going to be locked up for 24 hours.
So picture that. They punish you for reporting UFOs, and at the same time, they get all the information. Obviously, I'm running very short of time, but one of the things that I was very excited about this year was that some research done by a gentleman named Anthony Bragalia, and he has developed information linking Wright Patterson Air Force Base, the Roswell, New Mexico crash, and the Battelle Corporation, which is just down the street from Wright Patterson in Ohio. And it turns out that in 1947, surprise, surprise, Wright Patterson contracted Battelle to develop memory metal. They wanted some kind of alloy with memory metal properties. Now why, of course, they picked that particular year to get started, I think we all know the answer. Nitinol is a nickel and titanium alloy described as memory metal. And interestingly enough, and this sounds familiar, when he tried to get the first and second progress reports by Battelle Corporation, they said that the Wright Patterson archivist has them, and Wright Patterson said that Battelle has them. So actually, that's their way of neither one of them are going to come up with the information. The reference that I make for this is the new edition of Witness to Roswell, which is the revised edition. If you're going to buy that book, which I would recommend, is get the new one. It has a lot more material in it, and it has all of this information. June actually got to handle a piece of the metal.
Now, is this the same period of time? I remember that you mentioned before that someone actually showed you a piece of something.
Yeah.
Was this during the same period of
Yes,
time?
51, 52.
Okay, now who showed it to you?
Okay, it was Lieutenant Rose is the one that showed it to me, or Captain Wheeler. Now, it could have been one or the other of those guys because they were both in personnel shoots. And he walked in, and they always liked to rag me because they couldn't figure me out. And he threw it on my desk, and it was a piece. Well, it was a piece that's about this big, and it was
About half of, about the size of a business card?
Yeah, about that size, and a half of this.
Okay.
There, and it was bent like this. And he says, "June, you're a good wrecker. Tear that thing apart. Break that up." And I took it, and I bent it, and I twisted it, and I laid it back down, and it got right back the same shape. I got on my desk. He says, cut it, try cutting it." I got on my desk, I got my scissors out, and I snipped at it, and there was no way I could even cut that piece of metal. And it was as light as a feather. I had it in my hand, and I would say that it didn't weigh as much as these two cards. It wasn't that heavy. It was so light, but strong, and it was the thickness would be about, say, let's see. It would be about that thick.
So it's fairly thick, but it doesn't weigh anything.
But it had no weight at all. It was like a feather. And so strong, it was sort of a grayish gunmetal type of color. And you could see that on the inside there was there was coating on the outside. Both sides of it was the same. And the inside seemed to have a sort of a light lead-colored center to it.
What were the edges of this like? Were they even, or was it like part of something else?
It was even.
It was
all
even.
even. And I said, "What is it?" He said, "It's a piece of a spaceship." When I, got through with it, and I couldn't do nothing with it, I said, "Well, what is it?" And he says, "Piece of a spaceship." I said,
I'm going to go on from there in the interest of time. I tried deliberately to goad her, and I said, "Oh, come on now, it's been 40-some years, you've seen all kinds of things since then," and she just was really solid and said there was never anything that she's ever seen in her life that was like that metal. And another person walked into the room, and that officer stuffed it in his pocket, and that was the last time that she ever saw it. And she did say that man was breaking security. Now, obviously, in the interest of time, I'm going to have to move through some of the history. After June left, in 1953, she moved with her husband and son to Portland, Oregon. And tragically, on their wedding anniversary, he was killed in front of their house by a drunk driver, their 10th wedding anniversary. Her son was injured in the same accident. She ended up raising him as a single mom. And of course, in 1998, June passed away. This was her obituary in the local paper. So last time that I talked to June, she made me promise I would tell her story. And so that's what I've done here today. And it's also been part of The Secret, the video, and I also have been interviewed by a couple people over in Europe, so her story is over there somewhere, and it's certainly all over the internet. We took the story in 2000 to Roswell, and I gave it personally to Glenn Dennis. I got to meet Glenn Dennis and talk with him at length, and after I left that room, I was even more convinced. So I asked you a question in the beginning: what makes history real, a heritage, something held in the heart that moves you to commitment and action? My answer: when someone else's experience in another time and place feels like it could be your own. What I learned from June: there are truths so profound they cannot be denied or ignored or classified or hidden away. The truth will come out. Everybody here has a duty in your own way to help end the denial and the secrecy. There's some way that you can push this forward. Even if it's something little, figure out how to do it. We don't give up, we don't give in, we don't sell out, and we don't surrender. We speak truth to power. We're not as powerful as they are. But what we do have is, if we stand on the truth, they can't do anything about it, and they don't like it. Thank you, June, and thank all of you for your kind attention.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Well done.